Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and thank you so much for joining me today for the Friday Masterclass, where today we'll be talking about optimizing your editing experience. So this is continuing this series that we'll be doing over the next couple of months, all about the fundamentals of getting started with editing in Premiere and how that integrates with After Effects and Audition and all the other apps in our that are included in Creative Cloud, part of the video applications. And we're going to once again go through some really important things that you need to know, including highlighting like the keyboard shortcut editor, touching further upon some of the ways that we were talking about playback optimization. Not everybody's on the same system. If you've got an M1 Mac, your Premiere Pro experience is going to be very different than if you're like today, I'm using my 5-year-old iMac. It's a different playback experience, and the new machine can handle things that the old one maybe can't handle as well. So we're going to go into proxies, and more importantly, we're going to talk about how to create proxy presets and ingest presets and kind of dive a little deeper into some of that nerdiness. Once again, we're welcoming our friends from No Film School to the master classes, so thank you so much for joining. Also, for most of you, now, of course, I'll be reading all the chats coming to you live across a whole series of different networks. So if you're on the No Film School YouTube, I'll be answering your questions there. We also have, of course, our main chat that I'm following over at b.net/Adobe Live. So if you've got questions that you want to get right in front of my eyes, go ahead and share them there. We're coming to you live across YouTube, Behance, Twitter, and LinkedIn today. So thank you so much for joining. I see we've got Karen Brisa here. Tun, how are you doing? Huda Films, Erland, Friday equals Jason and Beer. Love that. Ameya Baloch, nice to see you. All right. And we've got Umacorn, Z by HP. Ashley Lynch, what is happening? Nice to see you. Jan Tiller, Tim, Oliver, Steve Festus, Kosa Boom, great to see you as well. Pierre Julien, how are you doing, my friend? Long time no see. And many more. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started, and we're just going to dive once again right in. Now, today we are going to do a little bit more of editing. Remember, these first couple of lessons are all about basics and fundamentals and really diving deep. That first episode, we talked about primarily, it was preferences, real hot stuff. But, sometimes you have to get through those things to kind of understand everything else, all right? So we're going to start in Premiere Pro, and I think the best place to start is just, once again, creating a sequence, creating a timeline, and let's talk about some of our playback options and different ways that we can solve some of the issues that we may potentially run into. So all of this footage here was stuff that I shot quite some time ago. I just chose it because I haven't shown it on stream here. I've been showing a lot of this iPhone 13 Pro Max footage that I shot recently. And I thought, I'm going to go back to old school, especially for some of our new viewers watching who may not have seen some of this pretty content. This was all shot DSLR. This is 1080p, 24 frames per second. So as we mentioned, and just to kind of reemphasize, we were talking about this in episode 1. Again, different ways of, my head's in the way there. Different ways of viewing. So we've got our list view, icon view, and freeform. You can see I'm currently in the icon view. Just to reiterate again, you can move things around and reorganize them inside the project panel in icon view as well. So it's just simply by clicking and dragging, I can reorder, but everything is always going to snap to that grid. The difference between that and freeform, of course, is that you can stack things any way you want, stack clips on top of one another, string them together, resize your hero clip, as the main clip of a sequence or something. You have a lot more flexibility. All right, but to just begin the process of building a timeline, I'm simply going to select a clip here in the project panel like this. We'll take this first one of my Moog Rogue, which is behind me here. Go ahead and select new sequence from clip. Okay, and it does just that. Now, one quick thing about this. New sequence from clip, why it's great is because it's going to take the attributes of that clip, frame rate, frame size, aspect ratio, and build a sequence with those attributes. Now, something that I don't even think we went into in that first one, because as always, there's lots of different ways to do the same function in our Adobe apps. You can also start by creating a blank sequence and dragging content into it. Now, there's a couple reasons why you might do that. One, some people like, that's kind of a more traditional way of doing it. Nothing wrong with that. You can do that. Also, it also allows you to sort of customize beyond just the attributes of a single clip, other elements of a sequence. So how do we do that? So we're going to get into a little bit of that there, because again, that too can help inform and ultimately dictate some of your performance down the line, particularly if you're going to be working with mixed media. Remember, we talked about that in episode 1 of this series. One of the great things about Premiere is that you can have a 1080 timeline and throw 4K and 8K and 12, all the Ks could be in there. They could all live and exist in their native frame sizes too. And Premiere just lets you play, and they can be different formats, and it'll just do the work. But that doesn't mean that your playback experience, that your cutting and scrubbing experience is going to be optimized. So that's what we're going to really get into. But let's talk about building a sequence, a blank sequence from scratch. A couple ways to do it, of course, always up at the top, File, New, Sequence. All right, shortcut key N, same as the new item or new document in Photoshop, right? That's the other thing. Again, a lot of the keyboard shortcuts, same across the Adobe applications. You also have this button here at the bottom of the project panel, which is the new item button. And if you simply click on that, you'll get the same list of options that you have from the menu bar up at the top. So let's go into sequence. Now, one of the reasons that I don't actually talk about this too often anymore, and again, for those of you on the NFS side, this is probably going to be one of those elements that will be talked about or at least mentioned in the certifications that you'll ultimately do. So you want to be aware of this dialogue. One reason why me, as someone who shoots with, iPhone 13 and a couple of DSLRs, I don't typically go here because, again, I'm not using a ton of mixed footage. And also, I already know what I want to do. Now, if you have a specific format, or if you're working in a specific towards a specific output or something like that, then you may want to come in here and leverage some of the various presets. And if you just zoom in, you'll see there's categories for everything from, from ARRI, AVC Intra, AVC HD. A lot of these are sort of more broadcast specific formats, and the sequences as such were designed to follow certain broadcast standards. Digital SLR, again, now some of these you might say, how come there's no 4K DSLR preset? Yeah, because when these were made, I don't think DSLRs were shooting 4K then. We should certainly augment it with the new 4K preset. I'll show you how to modify it in a second here. But this kind of gives you an idea. Again, we talk about legacy formats and legacy elements. DV NTSC. NTSC is gone. Right? That tweet from about half a year ago, right? NTSC is gone here in the US. So, these are, if you're still working in DV NTSC or DV PAL, by all means, choose some of these presets. New sequence from clip will do the same thing anyway. And then you can see there's other ones for like ProRes RAW, for HDV, R3D workflows in a variety of different sizes. And here you can see these have been updated more recently because they're going all the way up to, I thought I just saw 7K, 8K. Maybe not. Oh, so yeah, we're missing, is it Dragon or Annihilator? I don't remember all their camera names anymore. So let's just, because I was talking about DSLR, let's just go into this one here. All right. So DSLR 1080p 24. That is in fact the format that all that content was shot in. All right. So this is going to give you, of course, just the description. And it even has, like the Canon EOS movie, full HD series. I guess it's still called that. I was once a Canon shooter. Some of this was shot on 5D and 7D. But it just gives you the attributes. Again, no surprises here. And then this is giving you the attributes of the sequence itself. So, number of video tracks, number of audio tracks, color space, super important, right? As we discussed in episodes 1 and 2, now that Premiere supports more than Rec 709, right? We've got these new HDR color spaces, Rec 2100. You have to be aware of what's in that sequence, right? And then from within this dialog, you'll notice up at the top of the sequence panel here, settings and tracks. So if you go into settings, this is the same as the new sequence dialog that we showed that first week. So this is where you can change the editing mode, right? And if you go in here, once again, you're going to see all kinds of various preset options, including just a custom one up at the top. So if you're thinking, well, I don't see iPhone, or I don't know, but just put it in custom or put it in DSLR. It actually doesn't really matter that much by today's standards working in today's machines. If you are working specifically with ARRI or some of those others, it may behoove you to choose one of those editing modes. Personally, never seen a massive amount of difference in the experience. The other things I'll show you will be more critical to bettering your playback and scrubbing. Video attributes, again, you can change your frame size, aspect ratio, no fields in this case, of course, color space, as just mentioned, okay? This is where all those things are set. Audio, sample rate, for most of us, it's gonna be 48K. Actually, I'm curious in the chat, especially from No Film School, are any of you working in Premiere in 96K? Just because your master audio was captured in 96. I'm just curious. If you feel like chiming in, please do so. Now, video previews, this is important because, again, we'll get more into this later as we talk more about deep diving into editing. That's not today, that's another episode. But your video previews are super important because this is going to allow you to use those preview files. So let's say if you choose the default as iframe MPEG, but we'll often change that to ProRes to talk about that too. If you've got a lot of effects and things going on that you need to render in the timeline, again, in an effort to better playback performance, if you're using, say, ProRes 422HQ preview files, once you pre-render them in the timeline, those same preview files can then be used for export, which of course means that it doesn't need to re-render all the frames. It's going to use the preview file render. So as long as you use a suitable format, and again, I would highly recommend ProRes or Cineform. The fact that it still defaults to iframe MPEG is, I don't really know why, actually. Again, traditionally, yes. Today, it's very broadcasty still. If we go into the tracks section, okay, this is where you can say, now default, all sequences have 3 video tracks. Maybe you want 6, maybe you want 10, maybe you want 1, whatever it is. That's where you choose it. And this is probably the most important and the most critical. Now, we could spend an entire episode practically talking about this right here. But this is what trips up a lot of people. And this is the audio configuration of your master sequence, all right? Now, again, if you're shooting with sort of traditional mirrorless DSLR, I don't even know what traditional means, just commercial mirrorless Z6 by Nikon or whatever letter number Canon are on these days, or again, as mentioned, even the iPhone 13 Pro, you're going to be working with sort of stereo audio, right? So that your master fader, the main output of your audio is left-right, okay? 5.1, if you're working towards using a surround sound mix to be played and mixed and designed in a surround environment, you can go into 5.1. That's specific to 6 channels of output. And I'm saying that because that is different from multi-channel, which allows you to choose, as you can see here, up to 32 channels of output. Now, for the uninitiated, you're going, well, what is that for? Does that mean Premiere can mix in 32 points surround Dolby? No, that's not what that is. Many of your pro formats, including those by Arri and Sony and others, the cameras by default will shoot 8 channels of audio, or maybe 4. So this is where you can determine that. And specifically, the number of channels is reflecting the number of output channels on that final master mix fader. Okay? Does that make sense? So you can have stereo audio in there feeding wherever you want it to go, channels 1 through 8, right? A lot of times, particularly in broadcast, or if we're talking about for like exports for Netflix and other things, you may have an 8-channel export or a 16-channel export, and each stereo pair contains perhaps a different language, which they can then flag and adjust on playout after the fact when your render is done. So there's a number of different reasons why you can have a different series of output channels in audio, but this is where that's set. And if you're going beyond 5.1, you want to use the multi-channel method. Only choose 5.1 if you are specifically going to be working in Premiere in surround, 5.1 surround. Does Premiere do 7.1 surround? No, it does not. Does Audition do 7.1 surround for mixing? No, it does not. 5.1 is currently the standard there. But again, you can still have more output channels regardless. But more output channels, 10 output channels doesn't mean or rather 12 output channels doesn't mean like 10.2, in other words, okay? So if you're looking to do surround mixing, Premiere and Audition, it's 5.1, but you can still have multi-channel outputs. And then here's where you can also determine how you want the default tracks to appear. Standard is exactly what it is. It's going to take stereo content or mono content, it'll play it out properly accordingly based on your pan pots or whatever you have set. Simple and easy. 5.1. Now, typically you're not going to have 5.1 audio tracks by default unless your audio mix has already been done and you specifically want it delivered to you as a 5.1 interleaved audio file via WAV or AIF. What's an interleaved file? It's one WAV file, or AIF, that has all 6 channels. So it's not stems, it's one file that lives in a 6-channel track, okay? So you're only going to choose that if you're going to be placing interleaved 5.1 mixes into those channels. This is a common mistake as well, right? Adaptive is just that. It's going to adapt to any type of audio file that you drop into there. This is most specifically useful when you're cutting in VR that has ambisonic audio soundtracks. Now, the current implementation, or I should say, well, it is the implementation, but limitation? That's not really the right word. The current ambisonic format that Premiere passes through is a 4-channel higher order ambisonic that has kind of become the standard for YouTube, for Facebook VR. So you'd want adaptive tracks in that case. And the files themselves are spit out the same way that interleaved multi-channel files are. I have like a Zoom H2 recorder and another Sennheiser one. And when it makes its .ambix file or whatever their particular format is, it comes out interleaved. So it's one file that contains all 4 channels, okay? And then you have mono, and then you have your submix tracks. And again, these are tracks that you'll have in your sequence by default that are meant to be submix or group bus tracks. I will seldom make those standard, but it just gives you the idea. And then of course you can also label these things. You can adjust the panning and balancing. The output assignments, this becomes more critical when you're doing things like, you know, again, based on what it is that you're doing here, where you want a particular audio to go in a particular scenario. So again, here I'm doing like a multi-channel, 6-channel output, but that's not surround, okay? And then because of that, I can tell Premiere by default, okay, well, anything that's coming into, you know, track 1 mono is going to play out into channel 1. You can see the pairs here. You can see how that works. So there's a lot of flexibility here, but it's more about being aware of how these things work, okay? And then, as mentioned, you also have a VR video tab here for those of you working in VR. This is where you only have equirectangular projection as an option. Equirectangular is the format that is required for Premiere to be able to take that side-by-side or over-under VR content. It can also be stereoscopic, but it has to be equirectangular, right? There's lots of different formats of VR, cube and spherical and different flavors. Equirectangular is what we want, okay? And you can modify those settings once you have that there. All right, let's go to the chats real quick. All right. All right, let's see. Pete is asking, am I going to try out the new Mac Studio? I hope so. Tun is asking, can you tell us something about different frame rates in different countries? Yes, well, very briefly. Sure. So again, just by default, sort of if you're in the US here, and for broadcast, we're more sort of commonly working in 29.97, non-drop, or 30. You know, if you're in other parts of Europe and the world, more standard would be 25 frames per second. If you are shooting and going for that film and cinematic look, even on a DSLR outside of country or wherever, 23976 or 24 frames is what achieves that particular motion blur that gives you that sort of film-like aesthetic. And then as you get into 50 and 60 FPS, again, think of how if you've watched videos on YouTube that are in 50 or 60, typically you're going to record in higher frame rates like that. If you're trying to do some kind of a slow-mo, it's becoming more standard to do things like 1080 and 60 or 1080p and 50. I don't particularly like the look of that. It feels as digital as it is to me. My eye, it never adjusts to that pleasantly. I know many of the Sonys by default shoot like 1080p 60. And I mean, it looks nice. It's very continuous. It just doesn't have the same, I love like the 23 24 frame look. I like that a lot. And 30, whatever. But 60, 50, 60 for me, I'm not a huge fan all the time. Okay, so once you do that, you can give it a name. Okay, sequence 1, very descriptive. And then save that as a preset if you so desire and build your sequence just like that. Okay, so again, you've got all these presets here. You can make your own, save them to fit whatever it is that you want in lieu of doing the new sequence from clip option. Okay, all right. Yep, and Tuna is saying, yeah, 24 and 25 in the Netherlands for streams and news items. Without motion blur, it's unnatural. Exactly, and that's partly why, again, if you're shooting with a mirrorless or DSLR or on a, even, you know, if you're shooting in something like, what's the app on the iPhone that I'm forgetting right now? Someone will tell it to me. You can change the frame rate, shoot something in 60 frame, and then look at that same thing in 23976 or 24, depending upon which option your camera has, and look at the difference. And do some motion, do something where you're moving, and you're just going to see your eye is probably, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a generational thing too. You know, I am not of this generation, so for me, that other kind of motion blurred, specific kind of look, it feels more natural to me. When I see 1080, 120 frame per second stuff, or even worse, like 1080, 48 frame, not so good. Not so good. For me personally, all right? And Cornell's asking, why are movies and theaters at 24? Same thing. It's that classic cinematic look. That's how you achieve that. If you don't want that, watch The Hobbit and that whole series, which was, you know, the HFR revolution that didn't quite take off because it was all 48 frames and it looked like episodic TV. You know, that's part of one of the things that you'll note if you're working in 50 or 60 is that it tends to look more like, yeah, like, you know, for those of you in the US, if you're in like General Hospital, it feels like a daytime TV show, right? Whereas 24 frame is going to give you that, well, it's this look, right? It's just kind of a little smoother. There's just something about it, right? This is being shot at 24 frame, okay? Not that you can really tell over a live stream anyway. Forget that example. Okay. What else we got? Okay. Dude fam, amazing stream. Thank you. We haven't even done it all that much. Appreciate that. All right. Checking other questions here. All right. Okay, Insta360 footage, Huda Films is asking. Tried to import it, but it didn't work. Okay, I can't speak directly to that because I don't have an Insta360. Again, make sure you're exporting as equirectangular. It can be in H.264 or H.265, HEVC. We accept those formats. We'll accept MXF as well for VR. So, but I don't know what the Insta is spitting out. So check the specs. It has to be equirectangular. Again, maybe it's doing cube or something or some other flavor of VR, and that could be why Premiere doesn't work with it. Okay. All right, so once we have the footage in the timeline here, okay, we have, again, the ability to simply just begin working with this, cutting it, playing it back, whatever. I'm going to mute the sound here, and let's just play this back. Now, one other thing I want to point out here, another little tidbit. So you see this little green light that I have in the bottom left of my program monitor? That is the dropped frame indicator. Now, that I believe is not enabled by default. You're going to want to turn that on, specifically for optimizing your performance, because it's going to tell you as you're playing and cutting, am I dropping any frames? So if we click on the wrench menu here, that option to enable that is in this menu here. Okay, and it's right here, show dropped frame indicator. All right, you're going to want that turned on. Now, this being just sort of 1080 footage, and I don't have any effects on it or anything, I mean, it's not struggling at all. Not having a problem. Now I'm just curious. I'm going to drag a couple other clips in here. I don't think it's going to trip it up, even if I try to resize or do anything. Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to make this trip up. The point is that this is where, if you are having issues with this, you're going to modify your fractional playback settings. Now, we showed this last week. After Effects has it too. I showed it the first week. This is where it lives in Premiere. And again, this specifically here says playback the footage at 1/4 resolution. So as I'm cutting or playing back or scrubbing, it's in 1/4 res. And if we go, sort of more full screen here, by the way, I'm using the tilde key again, just hovering over a panel and hitting the tilde key on the US keyboard to do that. It's not going to be quite as sharp because we're viewing it at 1/4 res. But when I stop, you can see it's as sharp as day and night. Let's go back into playback here at 1/4 res. You can see it's very pixelated, right? Stop, sharpens up. Play, stop. Okay, I'm also rack focusing, so it's kind of moving as we're doing that there. All right, now, where do you adjust the pause resolution? Again, we're going to go into the wrench menu, and they are shown here. Playback is currently at 1/4. Pause is full. So you can also have the pause resolution set to 1/2 or 1/4, depending upon how your system is handling it. Now, we talked about this one too last week, high quality playback. And I've had a couple of different explanations given to me about this. I'm going to try and give this to you as succinctly as possible. And if any of our esteemed QEs are watching today, Filmic, thank you, Rob Foltz. That was it, Filmic Pro, the app I was talking about where you can adjust frame rates. You can also do it in Premiere Rush, by the way, on the phone. If you want to see every pixel as it is intended, right, in its full bit depth, full color, full quality, you have to have this enabled. Now, when you have this disabled, how much of a difference is there visually? That I can't really tell you. And for a while, I'd also heard that this was only applicable when you're going out via Adobe Transmit. I don't believe that's still the case. And I can't visually really see much of a difference here. But again, we're also not playing back, we're pausing. So if you want to see everything, you want to have this enabled. Now, I can tell you, transmit usage or not, if you have that enabled and you're dropping some frames, turn it off. I will guarantee you'll stop dropping frames. Or at least you'll stop dropping as many. So it is doing something to ensure that you're seeing everything as it's supposed to be. All right? Kind of hidden in the menu there. Why wouldn't you want it on? Well, you don't always need to see everything in its highest quality glory. And also, we're in a shrunken view here. So your eye isn't going to see maybe that much of a difference. But you need to be aware of that, all right? And especially if you're going out to a secondary monitor, right, for your client, you're going to want that on. Okay. All right. No one's saying anything interesting here. Okay. Very cool. Cool. Okay. Nice. Okay. Karthik, what about creating a sequence in 4K? What is the sequence setting? 18:9? And how to export in 4K? All right, Karthik, you're asking a couple questions here. Again, if you were just to new sequence from clip, it's automatically going to create a sequence for you. Now, I don't know if you meant it to be 18:9, 16:9 is more standard, but again, aspect ratios are arbitrary. You can make it whatever you want. You can new sequence from clip, or even after the fact, if you go into the sequence settings for a particular sequence, you can still change the frame size and subsequently the aspect ratio. So let's say this was actually 1440 by 1080. You'll see that it will automatically now readjust to a 4:3 or, 2160 by 1080, a 2:1, or, 4160 by 3840, 13:20, whatever. You can do that here after the fact. But if you just new sequence from clip, it'll build it for you. And as I showed you, this is where you can, in the new sequence dialog, if you wanted to build a sequence that you can reuse with those attributes, build it, save it as a preset, and then it lives in that new sequence list, wherever you saved it to. Actually, I think when you do user presets, they're at the bottom. I can't remember now. You'll see it here, okay? All right. And then exporting is the same. It's, we're not getting into export now, but export media. And then you would just choose, it'll automatically, it's always generally going to go to some kind of match source, which will match the aspect ratio and frame size. So, if it's an 16:9 or an 18:9 different aspect ratio, some of these presets aren't going to work. They're going to conform to their aspect ratio. So again, you could customize it here as well. But if you just do an export, don't choose a preset, match source, it will take the source attributes and apply those based on the format you choose here. Okay. All right. Oh my God, that whole time I don't think I took a breath. Nice tips. Okay. Shlomi, I have need to install the plugin. Oh, okay, Shlomi's got it. So yeah, there may also be a plugin that does that conversion for you. I used to use a Gear 360 by Samsung, and they had something which was Windows only. And thankfully I had my little old Windows laptop. I think it was called like Action Director. And basically you have to shoot the footage in the camera, transfer it to this laptop, convert it in Action Director to an equirectangular H.265 HEVC, and then I could bring that into Premiere natively. So that's how that had to be done. And that's pretty common. Some cameras today, it's my understanding, some of them actually on the fly are creating the equirectangular output file as you're recording. So there's no like post transcode necessary, but not all of them do that. All right. So we talked a little bit about some of these playback controls here, okay? But that's not enough, because especially as you're working in 4K and beyond, you're going to find as you begin to add effects, color, right, transitions, multiple clips, maybe picture in picture, maybe you're doing a multicam edit, that at some point you might hit a little bit of a ceiling. In other words, you're going to hit some resistance, and that machine might slow down, and that may be reflected in, you know, this little doodad going yellow, telling you that you're dropping some frames. By the way, it'll tell you, you can see there's a little pop up there, exactly how many frames you've dropped during playback. I'll pull up a sequence after and show you what that looks like. So this is where now we want to deal with, or we want to talk about creating proxy files. Now, I showed you the initial implementation of proxies a while back and how those work. And I want to kind of get more into it now, but specifically we're going to talk about how to create a proxy that uses an overlay or a watermark, okay? Because as I may have described, when you have a proxy file, the whole point of it is to have a smaller, lightweight version of your native media, again, so that you can get better playback, scrubbing, cutting performance. And depending upon the attributes of said proxy, you know, if you're going from, say, 8K to a 720p proxy, yes, when you enable proxies, you'll know, because it's just going to look softer on screen, right? You're going from 720p to, you know, 6000p or whatever that's not that much, but you get the idea. You'll notice. But if you're going, say, from 4K to 720 or even 1080 to 720, it may not be as visually as obvious that you're cutting in proxies. Now, what does that even matter? I guess it doesn't, but if you want to create proxies and you want no confusion and you want to ensure that maybe you're doing dailies or these are your rushes and you're distributing them, and you want to add some kind of a brand or a watermark, this is why you want to create specific ingest presets for your proxy creation. So stick with me. This is going to get a little confusing. I'm hoping that this is one of the UI UX experiences that we ultimately revisit sooner than later. But let's talk about how you do that. Now, to talk about preset creation for proxies, we first have to understand that it works very similarly to the way you create presets for export, all right? So let's just go with what's happening here. All right, H.264, again, we can go to our format menu, lots of formats. So let's just talk about H.264 just for a second, pretending we're exporting this, all right? Now I'm currently in match source, high bit rate. Okay, hold on. I don't know if I'm being pinged because something is off. I got to close my Slack. Okay, I'm closing this. That's not for me. All right, back to the screen. Okay, sorry about that, getting all those notifications there. So you have all these different tabs down here that allow you to customize what that preset will be. Now, as mentioned, if you use match source, it looks at the source and then it matches all of those attributes based on the format. So that's the easiest way. Now, that doesn't mean that's the best looking output, right? It's just matching the source, and it's using a high bit rate, which is sort of an arbitrary use of the word high bit rate, because high is what's high to one is not to another, and it also depends on, are we talking 4K or 1080p? All right. Now, specifically in the effects section, this is where we can do a number of things. And this is going to apply to this notion of creating proxies, all right? Because one of the things you might want to do with a proxy, and in fact, here, let me choose a different clip, or rather a different part of it. Actually, I could have just done this right here. Because this footage was shot a bit more flat. Maybe you want to add a look or a LUT to your daily content, to your rushes, to your dailies. Or again, maybe you want to edit in this and you don't want to edit with like creamy, flat looking stuff. You want to give it kind of the look that you may ultimately use. You can apply a look to the footage as it builds those proxies. The looks are all of the various looks that we have in Lumetri. And you can see as I'm scrolling through them, it's just giving you, again, a different color, a different look to your footage. So the idea is that if I wanted to apply one of these looks to this footage for my proxies so that I don't have to look at it kind of in its, creamy, desaturated, decontrasted, original flavor, I can do that in the preset. Again, here's the before, there's the after, okay? That particular one isn't significantly different. We got like gold heat. All right, it's much different. Okay, you get the idea. So looks and LUTs, image overlays. So this is the one where, again, maybe you want to place your brand or your logo or some kind of a watermark. So here I can turn on image overlay. I can choose said image overlay, and let's do JP_logo. .png. All right, there it is. I'll open that. And there's my JP logo. And then I can say, where do I want it to go? I want to go bottom right. All right. And now this becomes an element that I could save as part of my preset. I can adjust the opacity. So again, maybe for my watermark for the proxies, I want it like 50% or maybe even less, maybe like 25%. Okay. Just so that the editor knows you're working on proxy footage. This is the property of, that was my never finished travel series called Jace's Places. That's what that logo's from. But you can add image overlays, all right? Name overlay, same thing. You can have the file name of your footage in there, all right? Time code overlay, same thing. You can choose the kind of time code that it is. All right, and we're not going to get into these other attributes. These are less likely to be used on proxies. Okay, now the reason I'm showing you this here is because to create the ingest proxy preset, I told you it's a little backwards. You first have to create your export preset, which you're going to use as the basis of your ingest preset. Makes sense. It might. It doesn't matter if it does or it doesn't. This is how you do it, okay? And to do that, we have to do that in Media Encoder. So we're going to go into Media Encoder. Now, if you've never been in here before, let me just move this so I'm not in the way. All right, if you've never been in here before, pretty straightforward. In the preset browser, you have, of course, all of the same presets that you have in Media Encoder, but you also have ingest presets, which you'll see inside of the ingest dialog. Okay, we'll get there in a minute. Now, as mentioned, to create a preset that has your watermark or logo for proxies, you actually have to create the export preset first. So I'm going to click on the plus sign here, and we're going to call that an encoding preset. All right, so we're going to create an encoding preset. And when I do that, it pulls up this new preset window. So we can give it a name, and we'll call this, I want to use ProRes for this, so it's going to be ProRes LT with JP logo. Format, it's going to be QuickTime, all right? Based on preset. Now, if you already have a preset with the attributes that you want, you can choose that. Or you can just go to like a specific format, which in this case, I'm going to use ProRes 422 LT. You can add some comments, what you want to use it for, that's up to you. And then you have the effects tab, just like I showed you, okay? Now, before we get there, remember, specifically, I want the frame size of this to be smaller by design. Regardless of what the original footage is, I want these proxies to be 720p. So this is where I don't want to just match source. I'm going to uncheck the property source value here, which is now going to make the width and height available to me. So I can change this to 720p, all right? And now that becomes the frame size of that proxy. Again, I can adjust frame rate, but I want to keep that based on the source, right? We might have mixed frame rates based on camera. Field order, it's not going to change, but same thing. Aspect, you get the idea, okay? And then you have other options in here in terms of bit depth. Now, this is, again, a question. Do we want to do the highest bit depth possible for the proxy? No. That's going to significantly increase the file size and make it less lightweight. So we want to keep it in 8-bit, all right? You've got a couple other settings here. Again, most of these you're not going to have to change. We're using this as kind of the dummy setting for our ingest preset. Now we're going to go over to effects. And again, this is where we could add a look if we want. Now, I don't want to add a look to anything because I have a lot of different mixed media here, but I do want to use the image overlay. So once again, I'm going to go back to my JP logo. I'll call this JP logo, right? PNG. There it is. Okay. Position, bottom right, opacity, 25%, okay? Now, if I wanted to also include, you know, the name, the clip name, I could do that. If I also want to include time code in those proxies, I could do that too. I don't want that for me, so I'm going to keep those unchecked. Once I've got everything the way I want it now, I'm going to click OK. Oh, and by the way, I can choose whether or not these have audio. I'll leave that on, of course. Click OK. All right, and there it is, ProRes LT with JP logo. Okay, and that specifically, again, is an encoding preset. So now I'm going to take from here, I can also just right click, by the way, and I'm going to create an encoding preset. So this is what we're going to use to ingest and create those proxies. So let's go ahead. Did I just say create encoding preset? Create ingest preset. Confusing myself. Well, we made it easy. Okay, so the preset name is going to be ProRes LT with JP logo for proxy. Very descriptive, okay? Use this to watermark all proxy footage. Okay, and then you have the option here. Do you want to copy files to another destination? All right. I don't need to do that. Do we want to transcode the files? Yes, because we want to do this in ProRes LT, right? Now, here's, again, one little tricky thing. It asks you to give it a destination. You can just leave that because when you go to actually create the proxies in Premiere, it asks you again. So the destination location is actually not baked into the preset. It seems counterintuitive. Why would we show it otherwise? I'm not exactly sure. Maybe because it does get saved in there, but you still have options to change it after the fact. So you don't have to worry about that. All right. In this case, the format, of course, is going to be QuickTime. And for the preset, what are we basing this ingest preset off of? We're basing it off of the one that we just created right here. ProRes LT with JP logo. All right. So go ahead and choose that. We can add file metadata to these proxies if we want, okay? We can do file renaming to the proxies if we want. Let's go ahead and click OK. All right. And now you'll see ProRes LT with JP logo for proxy ingest, okay? Now there's one more step. We need to export this so we can import this as an ingest preset into the ingest dialog. That's why we have these masterclasses. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Export Presets. Save it to the desktop. It comes out as an EPR file. Click Save or Proxy, and I'll call this NFS because I think I created a dummy one before for myself just to test. Okay, so now we're back in Premiere. All right, and I'm gonna come to your questions. I see you're asking here, so just hang on. Now we're back in Premiere, and I want to create proxies for this footage. And I'm gonna select a whole bunch. All right, so we're gonna select this clip, and this clip, and this clip, and this clip, and let's get some of these Galaxian clips in there because they're cool, and maybe this one here from Shibuya. All right. And we're going to right-click, control-click, proxy, create proxies, okay? Now, by the way, create versus attach. If you already created proxies elsewhere, maybe this footage came from someone else. Maybe this came from another editor. Maybe they built proxies in Avid or FCP or elsewhere. You can attach proxies after the fact. Reconnect full resolution media. Similarly, if you're only working with proxies and you want to attach, the 4 or 8K version of something to the low-res version, you can do it there. The really nice thing about our workflow is you never have to do any reattaching because it's a single click to toggle between proxy and native media, which you'll see in a second here. All right, let's go ahead and create proxies. And we open up the Create Proxy dialog. Okay, format's going to be QuickTime. Preset. Now, again, so here's the dummy one I created earlier, but these are the defaults, right? But we want to add the one that we just made. So let's go add ingest preset. Desktop. Here it is today. You can see just a minute ago. .epr. Open. All right. And as mentioned, as promised, where do you want it to go? So that arbitrary destination that it showed, it doesn't even show up here. It's just arbitrary. Again, I really should tell that really shouldn't be there because it's confusing. My personal preference is to have the proxies in a newly created proxy folder that lives next to wherever this original media lives. That's my preference. You can stick it anywhere you want, okay? And then we're going to click OK. All right. Or maybe for this, actually, yeah, all right, I'll do that. I already have some proxies generated here, so I'm curious as to how all of this will go. So what you're going to see now is we see this thing creating proxy jobs, okay? Because the proxy process, as you might expect, is happening in the background. So when I go to Media Encoder, what you're now seeing is that it is batch processing. And by the way, you can already see in the preview, see my watermark, see the logo? That's all coming from that preset that we just built. And all of this is happening in the background very quickly. Now, here's the amazing thing. You can start a timeline. Let's just start with this Shibuya footage, new sequence from. You can start a timeline with this footage, okay? And you can start cutting it and doing things with it. When the proxy becomes available, you can switch over. There's nothing you need to do. Now, obviously, as we're looking at this right here, you can tell this is not the proxy footage because it doesn't have the watermark. So how do we know that we're working with proxies? Well, that's going to involve enabling or revealing the Toggle Proxy Button, which you're going to find in the button editor, right? So we looked at that in our first episode as well. So in the button editor, the one you're looking for, it's already in my buttons, is this one here, Toggle Proxies. So if you don't have it, again, you just drag it, click and drag down into the buttons that you want. That's what it looks like, okay? So now with this clip in the timeline, when I click Toggle Proxy, now you know we're working on our proxy footage. Turn it off. Now, can you see why I added that watermark? Because to the naked eye, the footage didn't look too different. Now, again, it doesn't really matter, but if you're wondering, here's the case in point. If you are editing with a lot of footage, you're going, God, why is it so sluggish? I just made all these proxies. Well, sometimes you can't tell. Maybe you've turned proxies on, but you took the button out of there, so you don't even know. If you've got the watermark, you know. And now you can troubleshoot other reasons why you might not be getting the performance you should be getting, all right? But as mentioned, so now when we drag our clips in here, okay, do all this stuff, just muting everything so we don't have any of this audio in here. All right. Oh, and that footage, this is 4K down here. So these are 1080 clips. That's fine. Again, the proxy is still 720p. And case in point, ProRes 422 LT is so good that visually, now again, if we were looking at this full screen, yeah, I mean, I can already see it's a little softer, right? So here's the non-proxy, here's the proxy. It's a little softer. You're probably not even seeing that difference on stream, but that's how good the format is. Now, if you were doing this in H.264, it's going to be way more noticeable, 4K to 720p. H.264 is a very heavily compressed format, not ideal for proxies either, as we discussed in episode 1. Highly recommend DNX HD, GoPro Cineform, or ProRes, Proxy, LT, whatever. Not HQ or 444. They're too big, too heavy by design. You don't need that for a proxy. All right. Okay, so let me understand. When I do the export proxy, the export is created from the original file and not from the proxy. So why add LUTs in export settings and not in timeline? Proxy is meant for me to work faster. Again, you're doing it in the ingest preset just so that in the case of, I can give you an example of an editor friend of mine. They really despise working with flat footage. It breaks their whole vibe. So I created a preset for them that automatically bakes in, when it's creating the proxy, a look. So there's no additional overhead. You're not making the file heavier or lighter. It's baked into the export. So yes, you could not apply it and then apply the look in the timeline, right? But that's adding a layer of something on top of that, adding to the playback complexity. Absolutely do that. I seldom ever apply looks to proxies. It's just some people like to work that way. So it's just I was just trying to show you that that's how you create a preset that does that on whether it's ingest or export or whatever. Okay, so you don't have to do it that way. That's just one way to do it. All right. Tun Verhoeven, imagine you sent the client a proxy render. That would be embarrassing. Okay, so here's the amazing thing now, Tun. So years ago when we introduced this feature, you actually had to turn this off. In other words, you had to go back to the native footage. And this is a great question. Watch this though. So I'm working in proxy. I do my whole edit. I don't ever get out of proxy mode because I'm creating my final footage. I'm working towards the end and I get done. I'm like, cool. Choose my thing, do my preset, export, whatever. Do you notice something? You notice something missing? So now by design, by default, it is using the native footage for export. It knows, even if I'm in proxy mode in Premiere, when I send this to export, don't export the proxies. It knows that, okay? Now, you do have an option here to use the proxies if you want to. Okay, you can see I turned it on. Sorry, it was a little delayed. Turn it on. Now we're using the proxies. It is off by default, which means it's going to use your native footage by default. Excellent question, my friend. Wonderful. Javon Towns, are you currently using Camtasia for filming these tutorials? No. So this is all live stream, so no Camtasia. The software I use for live streaming is Wirecast Pro. Okay, all right. So now that you have these proxies, your playback is going to be infinitely better. And now you, based on your machine, which may have been sluggish before, you may very likely be able to do full quality, playback, scrub, cut, whatever it is. By the way, here, I'm just going to scale these up just so that's just going to drive me crazy visually. All right. You shouldn't drop a frame now. Now, there are some instances. It could be the footage. Again, maybe it's some heavy content you're working with. I'm not going to say you're never going to drop a frame. It could still happen. But the proxies are going to lighten that load so much for you. And honestly, if you're doing anything 4K or above, that's going to be long form. You saw it. It's pretty quick to transcode all of those. They were shorter clips. If you got a lot of long media, and it's a 1-minute edit, maybe you don't make proxies. Maybe you can just edit the whole thing in 8th res, right? So here's what 8th res looks like on this footage. Okay. So that's 8th res 4K. Stop. Playback. Stop. Okay. So you got to try it out. But the proxy is going to make a huge fundamental difference. Last thing I just wanted to evidence here, again, we'll get into this more. Premiere Pro menu, keyboard shortcuts, edit menu on Windows, edit preferences, keyboard shortcuts. This is where you have access to all the various functions. Now, I don't like to talk too much about keyboard shortcuts because, of course, depending upon where you are in the world and what keyboard you're on, they're just not the same for me or you, unless you're on the US keyboard. But this is where you can customize everything. This is also where you can find out what all these various things do. Okay, and you can see that on the US keyboard, this, by the way, is the tilde key, if anybody's been wondering what I'm talking about. And it tells you, maximize or restore frame under cursor, right? So that's like the main one here. On the Swedish keyboard, I think that's like one of these bracket keys over here, if I recall correctly. So it just changes based on the keyboard you're using. But my friends, that is all the time we have for today. So thank you again so much for watching. Thanks to our friends at NFS. If you've got more questions, hit me up on YouTube, Jason Levine Video, Creative Cloud, or on Twitter at BeetleJace. Until next time, we won't be here next week. We've got a global company day off, but we'll see you on April 1st with more. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.